All right, so there are many different objections to whether or not we should believe what the Bible has to say. We know this. There's some from the fact that, oh, is it relevant? I've heard people say, oh, it was our first try, or it was civilization's first try to make some sort of reference to morality and all these different things. But one of the things that I want to talk about is, one argument that I've heard is that there is no truth in the Bible. You can live this way and it will help you out a little bit better, but there's no actual truth in the Bible. And one of the things that we use as our reference of truth is science. These things that we can put in test tubes, we can qualify, we can quantify, and prove these things exist, they are true. Well, what if I told you that the Bible proved things to be true before science itself even proved them to be true? There are many examples of this, but I'm going to look at 5. One of the examples that I want to look at is just involving Earth itself. Some of the oldest theories about what is Earth, what's it supported by, there's the turtle, there's the bass, there's the man holding up Earth, and all these different theories of how is the Earth standing, what's holding it up, because that's the only thing we understood. Well, if we would have read Scripture, if we would have taken the Bible for what it says, in the Bible it says that the Earth is actually free-floating, it's suspending by nothing. Something that we didn't discover from science until way later on, and we had all these different theories of things that happened, but if we would have just looked at what the Bible said, it already said that, hey, this is free suspending. And if you're interested and want to see that reference for yourself, it's in Job. It's in Job chapter 26, verse 7, where it talks about the free suspending Earth. Keeping the idea of the Earth, the other thing that we didn't know for a very long time was that the Earth is actually round. In case you didn't know, science has actually proven that the Earth is actually round. We had theories about it being flat and worried that if you went over the horizon, you might actually fall off and die or something like that. And we didn't discover the fact that the Earth is actually round until a certain individual called Christopher Columbus. But some people will argue that we found out beforehand, because after Christopher Columbus found out that, oh, the Earth is round, and Scripture actually says this and says, wow, yeah, the Earth is round, just so you know. They tried to change it and make it sound like, well, we've actually known the Earth is round for a long time. It was just kind of a theory we came up with, that it was flat. But if you're interested in that, in Isaiah chapter 40:22, it talks about how the Earth is actually round. This is something that, like I said, was not discovered until a certain individual named Christopher Columbus did, which you probably learned about him in school. Also, keeping this idea of the Earth. I enjoy looking at the Earth because this is just something we can all be very familiar with and we understand because we live on it. Something that was revealed in Scripture, but we actually didn't figure out until the 19th and 20th century, is that at the very core of our Earth is lava, fire, constant burning. Okay, we knew that under the Earth's crust it got hotter, there was heat and stuff like that, but we didn't actually find out that the Earth's core was this burning lava, this essentially this gathering of fire, if you want to even say it that way. But in Job chapter 28, verse 5, it talks about how under the earth, under the crust, is these swirling winds of fire, is how it kind of talks about it. And it's very interesting that all the way thousands of years before, we didn't discover this until the 19th and 20th century, that the Bible was already saying, hey, under this, there's fire, there's this core, there's this, under this crust, there's this burning, and something that we didn't figure out until way later. Now, one that I actually really enjoy is the water cycle. This is probably another thing that you learned about in school. You know, you got evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. This is something that we hear about in school. This was something that we did not discover until the 16th and 17th century, this water cycle. Scientists didn't really discover about how this all worked and everything until that time. But this is something that the Bible talks about thousands of years earlier in the book of Job and also Amos, which, to give you some understanding, those are thousands of years earlier. It's not just, oh, well, that was about like a couple of years earlier. This is thousands of years beforehand. All these different theories that we had, all these different theories that we drew together, that if we would have just looked at Scripture and taken Scripture for what it said, we would have understood, oh, hey, this is how it works. Okay? Now, this one, number 5, is probably a very famous one for us. And something that I want us to have in our head is, okay, the Bible obviously has some things here that it speaks about that are true. This is not just truth based upon feeling or something like this. These are factual truths, okay? Now, if the Bible is true in these areas, what does that say to other things that the Bible maybe lays claim to? Does that mean maybe we should reconsider some of the stuff that the Bible talks about and consider maybe it's true in other areas besides just these certain areas, okay? This last one that I want to look at is a theory that many people have accepted to be true. And it came in the 20th century. It's actually the theory that we drew for how the earth created itself, essentially, and how from that we had evolution and all these other things of how the earth, since we're taking the idea of the earth here, how it even came into being. You're probably familiar with this. It's the Big Bang Theory. This was something that wasn't established until the 20th century because scientists were able to look and see that our universe is actually expanding. Well, in an expanding universe, if you rewind an expanding universe back, there is a singularity. There is a point where it began. And that's what science has proven, and they call that the Big Bang Theory. Now, if I were to tell you that Scripture actually supports the idea of the Big Bang Theory, what would you think about that?
Heretic.
Well, it's a very interesting thing, because in the very first verse of the Bible, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." When you use heavens and earth together, it really means the universe. It really is saying He created everything. But that word, therefore, created is very interesting. Because that word, created, actually has the connotation, the understanding that it was created out of nothing. So if you were to read it, you could literally read it to say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing. Mm-hmm. Now, if that sounds familiar, if that sounds like the Big Bang Theory, these things coming together and blowing up and making something, it should. Now, this is one of the most common views held by people, and it's used to back up evolution, it's used to back up all these different claims of why we are where we are now. But here's the thing we have to ask ourselves. We've only looked at 5 truths that are revealed in Scripture. Not only just 5 truths that were discovered well before we discovered them. The question we have to ask ourselves is, why didn't we take the Scripture for what it said? And if we would have taken the Scripture for what it says, we could also ask ourselves, how much further along would we be? It's kind of interesting to think about. How further along would we be in our understanding of science and all this other stuff if we would have just taken Scripture at face value? But, on top of that, if these claims are true, which they are, because not only science bears these things out and it's backed up by scientific fact, but if these things are true, if they stand to be true, then what does that tell us about other things in the Bible? Does that tell you that maybe those things have the potential to be true as well? The thing is I can't just convince you of this. I can't just tell you these things. These are things that you can look up for yourself, and I've given you different Scripture references so that you can see them. You can also go online. You can go to different places and see when these things were discovered versus the time that the Bible actually had them dated at and when it was revealed in Scripture. And that's something that I would challenge you to do. Challenge you to do a little bit of homework on this, because one of the coolest things about Scripture, and when we read it and we find out that God, He's made these things, He's created all this stuff, is that He actually tells us to be intelligent. He tells us to weigh things out. He tells us to test things. He tells us to take into consideration everything. And taking into consideration just these 5 things, what we can find is, at least in these 5 things, God is factually accurate, and He's true. So, my challenge to you would be, do some homework and find out where else He is also true.